the general narrative has been that central banks saved the day, that it was the free market which caused the crisis, and that monetary policy saved us from the excesses of the capitalists. Central bankers, they say, are the new masters of the universe. In fact, there's even a joke, and this is about the best joke that you're likely to get from the world of economists. How many central bankers does it take to screw in a light bulb? Just one, but he holds the light bulb still, and the earth revolves around him. But a counter-narrative has increasingly developed that maybe the effects of monetary policy have been at best mixed. Not only has monetary policy increased inequality and propped up inefficient companies, but that it's created an even larger asset bubble. In fact, some people say an asset bubble that dwarfs the asset bubble of 2008. Some of this commentary has even come from within the central banking establishment. The Bank for International Settlements, which is a central bank of central banks, has produced a number of papers showing that monetary policy has resulted in an even larger debt bubble. Global aggregate debt was about $150 trillion in 2008, and it's now $230 trillion. Bill White of the OECD has said that it's also resulted in debt dependency as a result of this in many economies, and that there's even larger bubbles in financial assets than there was in 2008. In his words, quite simply, the situation now is, quote, worse than 2007. Specifically with respect to QE, the Bank of England did a paper in 2012 which found that around 40% of all the proceeds of QE had gone to the wealthiest 5% in society. But as well as this, there's been an intellectual shift over the last few years. Perhaps more importantly than that, there's been a renewed interest in economists, some from generations ago, who pointed out the systemic negative effects of central banking. So I suspect many of you here today will be familiar with Friedrich Von Hayek. He wrote, his most famous work is The Road to Serfdom, which sold more than 2 million copies, making it one of the most popular political books of the 20th century. When Margaret Thatcher first became leader of the Conservative Party, at a presentation by a member of the Conservative Research Department, she's said to have pulled out a copy of The Constitution of Liberty by Hayek, put it on the table, and said, "This is what we believe in." But more of interest for us today is the work for which Hayek won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1974. And that's his work in how central banks distort the economy. Now, to understand this, you just need to understand that in every area in which price fixing has happened, it's failed. So we've had governments setting the prices of food, fuel, housing, and many other sectors through the 1970s and beyond, and it's always ended in disaster. In fact, this goes back millennia. So the Edict of Diocletian in the year 301 set prices in ancient Rome and resulted in widespread hunger and shortages. Thinkers at the time, such as Lactantius, had pointed out in advance that this would happen. And the reason for this is that prices in a market economy coordinate scarce resources. So prices are crucial to a market economy. If you take, for example, something like butter, the higher the supply of butter, all other things being equal, the lower the price will be. If the demand for butter suddenly goes up, then the price will rise to accommodate that. And of course, when the price goes up, that brings down demand, and it also increases supply. So prices are constantly coordinating the market. And when a government steps in and sets the price of something, it causes a mismatch. So if the government was to step in and set the price of butter too low, that means it gives the illusion of abundance. So more people will want butter than there is butter available, and fewer companies will produce it. So it causes a mismatch. So in other words, artificial price setting by governments causes false signals to be sent to the market. Now, if we look at interest rates, in a true free market, interest rates would be set by the amount of saving and the demand for borrowing in an economy. So the more people who are saving, that would bring down interest rates. On the other hand, if there's a surge in demand for debt, then interest rates then go up to accommodate that. So that brings down that demand for debt. And it also increases savings because interest rates have gone up. But as well as this, interest rates also coordinate the time preferences in an economy. So let's say a lot of people are saving. That then brings down the interest rate because there's more savings available to borrow. But what it also does is it gives a signal to the market that people are delaying their consumption until future time periods, i.e. savings is up, people are saving, so they're going to be consuming more in the future. So just as interest rates come down, businesses can borrow more and invest on a longer time horizon. So interest rates also perform this function. They coordinate the time preferences of the entire economy. So when a central bank sets interest rates, it distorts this mechanism. So similar to when the government sets the price of other things in an economy, like butter, when a central bank sets interest rates, it results in more debt being generated than there is savings available in the economy. So this, like other forms of price setting, is sending false signals to the economy. So a recent example would be the housing bubble in the US. So with the 1% interest rates around 2003 and 4 set by the Federal Reserve, that resulted in more houses being built than was justified by the amount of savings in the economy and the amount of resources in the economy. So at that point, the bust was inevitable. We're now seeing, with years of zero interest rates, we're seeing the same thing happen with consumer debt, with corporate debt, with stock market bubbles, and with bond bubbles. In the words of Andrew Haldane, who's the chief economist at the Bank of England, and I quote this word for word, "We have intentionally blown the biggest government bond bubble in history." Now, he also went on to say that a disorderly bursting of this bubble was the greatest risk to global financial stability. But of course, from Hayek's perspective, it's central banks creating these massive bubbles, which is the threat to stability. Once a central bank sets interest rates too low, you inevitably end up with a bubble, and that bubble will burst at some point. An economist whose thoughts also fed into this and influenced Hayek was Richard Cantillon. He was writing during the 18th century in France, and the Cantillon effect says that when new money is created, the people who receive that money first benefit disproportionately. So in other words, in the days of the French royal court, it was the people around the king. They will receive that money. They can then spend that money into the economy or invest it before prices go up. These days in the 21st century, with zero interest rates and quantitative easing, it tends to be hedge funds and the financial sector which benefit disproportionately. So they receive this newly created money, and they can then invest it in stocks or bonds before the prices go up in the economy. So that's also, when this new money is created, those institutions which receive it first, they will tend to pull in resources from other sectors of the economy. So again, when Cantillon was writing in the 18th century, that was the people closest to the court. But these days, when you hear of people with PhDs in mathematics and physics going to work for a hedge fund, that's because when a hedge fund can borrow money at 0% interest rates, at artificially low rates, they can leverage up massively. So their profits are artificially high. They're higher than they would be if we had a free market in interest rates. So these people with PhDs in physics who should be doing something productive in society, they end up moving towards those parts of the economy who receive the newly created money. So some people ask, with all this money creation, why has there not been generalized inflation? Well, the reason is that if a hedge fund manager made $50 million this year, he doesn't go out and buy 50 million packets of crisps. So you don't see that general inflation. On the other hand, Knight Frank have estimated that art prices, since the beginning of 0% interest rates, have gone up by 252%. And classic car prices have gone up by an incredible 487%. You also see in things like high-end London housing and other areas where the people who have received this money first are going to be spending money, there is actually inflation, even on a Chavez level, really, 500%. So in the days of Richard Cantillon and the French royal court, they of course had let them eat cake, whereas in the days of hedge funds and quantitative easing, I think that now needs to be updated to let them eat collateralized debt obligations, because that's where we are now. They're the receivers of this new money. So inflation, in a sense, general inflation, is in many ways the least damaging effect of money creation. Many conservatives talk about printing money as causing it. Of course, it does cause inflation eventually. But the more damaging effect is these distortions that it causes, pulling resources from productive parts of the economy. I gave a seminar at the OECD and the IMF in December, And several of the economists there actually said that this tallied with their work, looking at the number of inefficient companies in the economy and the number of so-called zombie companies, that these companies, through artificially cheap credit, are able to just pull in resources from productive sectors of the economy. Friedrich Von Hayek said that essentially the fundamental problem for a centrally planned economy is that it's impossible for the central planners to have the required knowledge to plan that economy. And that's what we have with central bankers setting interest rates. So it's not so much the individual policy errors by central bankers that have caused this, as much as it is a defective system. Central bankers setting interest rates for an entire economy are essentially in the same position that Gosplan was in the Soviet Union. They simply can't do it because this type of economic model doesn't work. So the recent recession was not some confluence of events. It was the result of a generation of monetary policy. Over the last generation, each recession has resulted in cutting interest rates, but then after the recession, they raise interest rates, but not back to where they were before. So over the last generation, economies have become more and more addicted to debt. So that debt stimulus, it becomes like a drug stimulus. Each time you need a stronger dose just to achieve the same effect. So that's why now we're at 0% interest rates. So we're coming to the end of this line now. That's why we have this $230 trillion of global debt. In some cases now we're even having economies moving into negative interest rates, the reductio ad absurdum of all modern monetary economics. This, of course, would occur nowhere in nature. It is an aberration to all market economics. So the economic problems that we have today are as a result of this debt bubble. In the words of Claudio Borio, who is the chief monetary economist at the Bank for International Settlements, debt was at the root of the financial crisis, and it has risen further globally in relation to GDP since then. So in other words, stuffing the economy with more and more debt, like foie gras, is not going to solve the problem. We're coming to the end of this model very soon. And to conclude, if the IMF were called in to help a country which was in distress, the last thing that they would suggest would be setting up price-setting committees for food, fuel, housing, consumer goods, and other sectors of the economy. When Venezuela sets the price of food or fuel, we're not surprised when they have shortages. So when central banks set interest rates at 0%, we shouldn't be surprised that we have a $230 trillion global debt bubble. If you go to the website of this event today, you'll see at the top a great quote from Margaret Thatcher, who said, "There can be no liberty unless there is economic liberty." But can we really say that we're in a free economy if we have a committee of economists setting interest rates which affect mortgage payments, house prices, stock prices, consumer and corporate borrowing, and transfer billions, if not trillions of dollars from productive parts of the economy to the financial sector? So I would argue this is just as important as the economic problems caused by monetary policy. A free society requires economic freedom, and central planning committees setting prices are the negation of economic freedom. Thank you.